statement, and number two is, the best effort as it relates to communication and as it relates to emergency nature.
Mr. Muser?
I'm a little concerned about the phrase legal matters, because there are going to be many instances where the superintendent, probably because of a potential conflict, right, that he doesn't want to tell the board because his decision-making possibly will be challenged, and then the board will act as the tribunal, right, hearing the appeal. Yeah. So, and I'm not exactly sure what an emergency legal matter is that would result in Dr. Stauffer notifying the board. Unless, Mr. Palmer, you just meant to include, give us an update on legal matters, and you didn't mean to characterize it as of an emergency nature.
I'm not including a specific case with names or anything. I just want to know how many cases are being handled in special education at any one time. When one comes up, I would just like to know, hey, we did receive a new one, and that's it. You don't have to come back and say, well, you might be called forward later to testify on this hearing. Yeah, we did have a couple new cases come up this week because there's nothing to testify to that. Right now, I'm in the blank about special education. I bet you all these people here are in the blank about it. I don't think anybody has any knowledge of what's going on in special education, legal matters, and I don't just like to know.
That's why I asked that question.
I don't think emergency is separate from the rest of the stuff.
Because I think some of us are interpreting that because it's following that with the comma that you mean discipline of an emergency nature, school safety of an emergency nature, or a legal matter of an emergency nature. Because I think many of the legal matters that Dr. Stauffer deals with are not of an emergency nature. It could be a subpoena to share records with the local court, which happens on a regular basis across the state, where school districts are asked to turn over personnel records or student records. I don't know that that's the daily operation of the school. So I think Dr. Stauffer would probably need a little more guidance around what type of legal matter he needs to apprise you of versus, say, board counsel apprising you of a legal matter, right? A lawsuit against the board versus a lawsuit involving two employees, and therefore they request a subpoena from the school district to provide records. Those are all legal matters. They involve the Wycomico County Public Schools in direct or indirect ways, but what's the guidance for Dr. Stauffer in terms of informing the board?
Well, maybe not so much the emergency part as it is the legal matter itself. Are we involved in any lawsuits? Is there any lawsuits hanging out there? Is special education involved in any lawsuits? I have no idea. Somebody told me before we're being sued by somebody on special education. I have no idea. True or not true? I just would like to have some information on it. Maybe that could be outlined in a procedure.
I was going to say, would that be something you would be giving us?
Whatever direction the board provides as to what, right? I think Mr. Palmer is narrowing the definition of legal matters to a pending lawsuit, a pending claim in a tribunal, whether it's an administrative hearing or circuit court. You'd like to know if the board is a defendant in a current legal matter.
Right. These voyas that you get, I have no idea if we get a lot of them. Are they answered? Got no idea. Should have an idea. I hope it's going smoothly, but as of right now, I got no idea.
I think this one's hard to quantify. I get where we're headed here, but maybe it's something that we don't change, but that's a conversation we have with our direct report here that, hey, just like Mr. Palmer said, you're not giving us what we need. Here's what we want. We get a weekly update. Maybe we need more detail in that. I mean, that's like a performance management issue to me.
And that could be in a procedure here. Or
It could.
To include,
It could.
yeah.
It's also sort of another definition item, like
Right.
what is emergency nature?
Right.
What are we talking about?
Like honestly, the weekend we had the Kent Island issue, it happened on a Friday night. To me, that was almost an emergency issue because it was all over. I mean, I got hit in the grocery store. I had no idea, and it wasn't his fault. It happened Friday night.
Right.
So it would be hard to define everything that goes in there without a conversation with, this is what we expect from you. And maybe to Mr. Palmer's point, we put something in there, we'll define a procedure of what we want to hear. I don't know how to word it.
I think
I'm
we
not
can-
an English
we-
major, obviously.
We've talked about
Don't
with
laugh.
myself a communication plan. Currently, right, a weekly update. I know that you hear from Mr. Muser regarding legal matters each month. You hear from me each week, and then if there's anything of an emergency nature which would impact, something that's going to be out in the community, I also provide additional updates to the board at that point in time. So that's in our communication plan that we talked about. So if that's something that we want to tweak or change or add to or whatever it may be, I think that's a good spot for that.
Okay.
What happened at that board meeting that I'm referring to should never happen to us on the board. We shouldn't have to go in there and hear all this stuff with not having at least some awareness of it. There were 4 items that happened, not just, it wasn't the day before, it was a week before, something like that. Had no idea. I don't know if any of you had any idea of those 4 items, but I'm looking for that way in this area so that doesn't happen to us again.
Are you talking about a board meeting, or are you talking about when the faculty or parent advisors were
I'm talking
here?
about at the board
The
meeting.
board
Public
meeting.
comment.
Those
To cobble it, yeah.
4 parents came
Okay.
out here.
I think the school safety report would be, I mean, I'm still down for it being a daily report, but I'm not sure how we're gonna do that.
I'd be satisfied with a weekly, unless it was an emergency. It's an emergency came up.
And we get those from Andrea. I mean, like a school's locked down,
Yeah.
or there was an active shooter or a bomb threat. We get a text to check our email.
Didn't we have a teacher that was injured pretty serious?
Yes.
With her jaw and.
We had an
something in
RO
her leg?
officer that got
I
knocked
think that's
out.
horrible, and I didn't hear about it.
Yeah, that's the type of stuff we're talking about. So
Yeah.
we're trying to see if that needs to be added into the policy specifically so that it's not overlooked by accident, or, how we're going to make sure that that's getting told to us. I mean, I get a lot of phone calls from parents. And when they tell me my daughter was taken to the hospital today and they took them out of school, I'm like, that seems like an emergency, especially to that parent. That's an emergency. And we don't know. And then they come to the meeting and they tell us that they had to go to the hospital and this, that, and the other. And then we're looking at them like, nobody told us that. So I don't know how to remedy that problem.
I think there are going to be some things that obviously it doesn't come to my attention sometimes until after the fact
Yeah.
regarding the reports that I may see as well, or what makes its way to my desk. So, like I said, if it's something that I'm aware of that I feel like is out in the community and that will be something that you will hear about, I make sure that the board's updated on that. I think sometimes, also we have parents and staff in advisories or in public comment that bring specific detail to incidents that may or may not be coming to our attention as staff at times, because they have specific details related to it because it is for them. So,
Well, I would assume if an ambulance or something is called to a school, you're given that information from the principal, aren't you?
we have ambulance calls on a regular basis, many times, for incidents that could be caused from an assault to that child, but most of the time just for medical
reasons.
issues that are going on with that child that we wouldn't share, that the principal wouldn't even share with me because maybe the child is epileptic or something like that, or it could be a staff member, whatever it may be.
I guess since David is the policy man over there, what do you suggest as far as wording on this?
I am thinking that it needs to be in the communications plan and our expectation for the superintendent.
Yes.
Okay.
The ultimate list of what we want as a board. In this policy, we could add something such as superintendent of schools is responsible for keeping the Board of Education informed about school operations, including information as requested by the board, and prompt notification of any happenings.
Okay.
Of any
So
what?
today-
What was the last word you said?
So looking at the policy now where you see including prompt notification.
Right, I heard
say
all. It was just the
including-
last word I didn't hear.
Yeah, I'd include including information as requested by the board of any and prompt notification of any happenings of an emergency nature. So it's anything we as a board request and emergency.
And the request would be on the other document.
It's some sort of communication plan,
Okay.
expectations.
And do we have a document for that? A communication plan? Is there something like that currently?
I haven't seen one.
Okay.
Once we approve
The policy?
To create a policy.
I like what David said, except for the emergency part, because again, we're into what's an emergency.
Yeah.
I mean, certain things are an emergency, but certain things are not. I like the happenings. And then again, he's the CEO of the school, and he reports to us. So in his annual review, quarterly, whatever we do, we can say, "Hey, this is what we want to hear about," and develop a plan.
Yeah, well,
At
the
some
plan.
And the plan I'm
plan would-
referring to is something that we did discuss when board members first came on.
Yeah.
Right,
As
right.
to what you would like to see, how you'd like to see
Right.
it. And I suggested the weekly update and again, anything that, if you remember my wording was something like anything that's going to be out in the community or on the news or in social media or whatever it may be to make sure that if I'm aware of it, to make sure the board's aware of it.
Is that something that the board would put together at a work session, sort of like we're doing for policy? How would we do that?
I don't think so. I mean, I'd have to look at his
Could be
annual
this-
review document,
yeah.
what's required in there, which I
Okay.
can get a copy to all of you
Okay.
of what the superintendent's typical review is.
If I can try to summarize that, where I think I heard where we are, and I'm hearing from Dave what you said, and maybe just a slight change in sequence. Everything that's there in black stays what's there, and then adding and additional and any additional information is requested by the board.
Just, the board does need to keep in mind, there may be times where Dr. Stauffer politely informs the board that he can't share the information. So there are instances where he cannot share information with the board because it could be subject to an appeal, right? It could be a medical matter involving a staff member or a student, and he can't provide specific answers. So right now, I understand Mr. Plotz, inserting that language instead of those 3 words there, but it doesn't mean that he may not be able to fulfill it in every instance.
In every instance.
Right.
At least to the level of detail.
Right, you'd be able to tell us
I
that
may be
something
able
happened
to,
with no
yeah,
names.
say
With no
something.
names.
Can't
Yeah, the
approve it.
names
I mean,
is
that's
not-
in case it
For
comes to
this,
us for
but
appeal.
I can
Right.
provide it.
Yeah,
in
the
this
names
way.
is not an issue.
Right.
I want to approach this in maybe a different manner.
That's a shocker.
And I try to see things in a simple way. I see what happened at that board meeting as a problem. Now, Dr. Stauffer, did your principals let you know about those 4 problems ahead of time? And if they did let you know, what harm would it have done to let us know about it? So what I'm looking for is all of this in between, and I heard a lot go by, it should be here, it should be there, but it's not there, and I know it's happening, or else those 4 parents wouldn't have come in and said something.
I think that specific incident did occur out in the community. The one that I'm speaking to specifically that was brought up out in the community, and it was still being investigated at that point in time.
No, you're talking about the 2 moms, right?
Yeah.
The two,
Okay.
the two
moms
mothers
I'm
that came
concerned about
in,
that teacher.
the one at Y High, and there was another
Yeah.
one at Bennett, I think, Bennett High.
Not familiar with the, thinking back to the Bennett, but the one at Y High
Yeah.
is what I was just speaking to.
That's
Yes.
the type of stuff
Mhm.
he's just
Yeah, I
talking
mean,
about. He wants to be.
So at that point in
informed.
time, again, that incident happened out in the community, just apparently a day or two prior to that. It was still being investigated, and the school was just learning of it at that point. in
The
time.
the lady that we're talking about, it happened at school. They had a video of their son being punched and knocked out in the hallway at the school.
Okay.
So that was something I would have assumed you would have gotten information on, because that would have been, I think it was either the day before or the day prior to that, before the meeting. It had happened that week, but it wasn't the night before, so.
The one I was
Sometimes I
talking
don't
about
think
was,
you get.
was at a.
Yeah, sometimes I don't think you get all the information.
Yeah, I don't think you get all the
that you
information
should.
either.
I think oftentimes, though, the school administration feels that some of these problems they need to handle and not come to the superintendent's office. And I
Well-
think if they've handled it, we may not hear about it, but I think they've handled the problem or they're working on it.
I think they do handle a lot, but they're not handling, I wouldn't have seen those parents. I don't want to see that again. You know, I just don't want to see that again. And I don't see what's the big secret about this. It'll just say, hey, or we had an incident at Y High where a kid got beat up in the hallway, and we are investigating it right now. That's,
Does each principal document every situation like that? If
or do
there's-
they leave it up to a vice principal
Does each,
or
I guess,
dean of
individual
students,
principal in
or-
school?
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. But I do
Like,
think.
you might not get it, but it's, that principal
Right.
has that information.
Right. If you remember the information that Mrs. Miles shared on the code of conduct, you know, and the number
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
of fights that we have had this
Right,
year with
exactly.
26 schools, 15,000 students. So, you know, that's more than we would like to have, and we're
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
taking steps as a board and also as staff to address those.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a
So
way
I
for us
guess
to get, I
going-
think we've asked that before, though, the squares that Ms. Miles showed us and you gave us before, that was the breakdown
Yep.
of the different schools. Is there a way for, I know that you guys don't want us to have the names, is there a way for us to get that information without that part?
Yes, and so
Okay.
in our work session this afternoon, as
Okay.
far as code of conduct, we've been just waiting to make sure that that
Yeah, 'cause
is,
that's- you're
that's
right.
the
Well,
information.
that's,
that
I
we
think
can
that's
share.
what this whole thing
Yeah.
is about specifically. So if
That
we can
won't-
word it the way David said, and
That
it
won't break it
includes.
down maybe to the level of detail that the mom shared with us.
Yes.
At a board meeting,
Yes,
and it may not give you specific details, Mr. Palmer, about that particular incident, but it would give you an idea of what type of infractions we're having in our schools on a regular basis.
Are you okay with that?
Kind of okay
Gives you a
with
little bit
that. Maybe I could think about this differently after I hear
This
what goes
afternoon.
on this afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the way
Let's go
that
to
David
conduct.
kind of
Yeah, let-
put it together, it would make more sense than specifically putting these things in there, so
Okay.
I'm
I
fine with
think
that.
whether it's addressed in here or it's addressed as a body with myself and staff, we're still leading to the same thing.
And I think also what a parent considers to be an emergency, we're not necessarily, or the school administration is not necessarily seeing it as emergency. They see it as an ongoing problem that they have in their schools on a daily basis.
And I
they
think
handle
back
it.
to what Mr. Palmer was saying, that's the message that I was receiving from that public comment. Not that you had to know every detail about that incident, but that this has just been an ongoing problem in schools.
Yeah. And why
And
was
she's
it
hoping
ongoing?
that,
Yeah.
she's hoping that there will be less of these types of incidents in our school system, and what can we do to address it?
Well, when we
So
get
I
to
think
code of
that's a bigger
conduct, that'll
picture.
fix a lot of this too. A lot of these things are
That's-
gonna go into each other.
That's my hope.
Yeah, like I'd like to know, why did it get to that point? What wasn't done for it to get to that point? Somebody dropped the ball somewhere. I don't know who, how, somebody dropped the ball.
So we
Until
good
I
with
heard about it
David's?
here.
Yes, David's.
Yeah.
The consensus is that to keep the language that was originally there in black, adding, and any other information requested by the board, or just keeping what was there.
I'm good with what David
Yeah.
suggested. And then we're gonna, our path forward will be to probably fine tune it in the communication plan or whatever,
Yeah.
as they were talking about.
So the red line that says including discipline, school safety, legal matters comes out.
And add that other one. And then there was one other suggestion, Mr. Palmer, you had under I, Your